and we have looked at this book a little bit when I fill in for my dad. What is my purpose under the sun? What is the purpose of life? We saw in chapters 1 and 2, the preacher discovered that all is vanity, all is part of an endless cycle, all human wisdom yields frustration, all pleasure and money cannot satisfy, all paths end in the grave. And we saw something very similar in chapter 3, all times and events are cyclical. And that was the theme of that chapter. But in chapter 4, what does the preacher discover? Ecclesiastes is always fitting at this time of year, as you come to the end of a year or the beginning of a new one. So I didn't time it based on the new year, but I think it works out well. But let's start with a question. Which is better? And I want to ask you to answer this. Which is better, to live a life of suffering, or to die young, or to never have been born at all? In light of the fact that life is treacherous and difficult, endless cycle. Are you grabbing the mic? Thank you, Rich. Which is better? 3 options. Choose to live a life of suffering, die young, or never be born at all, if you had the choice. Because that's what Solomon offers in this chapter. What would you say? Ray has an answer here.
To live a life of suffering, I would think.
Yeah, and why would you choose that?
Well, because if you die young, you basically, if that's right, you haven't suffered. And to never been born, you don't suffer. So the suffering brings you discipline to Christ.
Yeah, live a life of suffering, because the suffering brings you discipline to Christ. Anybody else? How would someone else answer that? It's a very good assessment. This is not a politically correct question. It might not even be considered a safe question, Any other thought? What if you were explaining this to your kid? Say, perhaps you're one of those parents who talks about all your trials, and so they wonder, what is the purpose then?
So one of the things that I kind of have taught my kids is, obviously, life in Christ, if we suffer with him, we'll reign with him. So if you had a choice to live a life of suffering and eternity in heaven, or vice versa, what would your choice be?
Right. That's good. You're thinking about, Ray's thinking about, he brought up how suffering brings you to Christ in this life. Rich is bringing out the fact that the next life should be considered heaven. So look at Job 3, verse 3, as Job dives into this. I know I haven't read anything from our chapter yet. I'll get there. Thank you for those answers. Job 3, verse 3. And we know that this kicked off Job's friends becoming very judgmental and accusatory toward him for the next days of Job's trial. But in Job 3:3, Job spake and said, "Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. Let the day be darkness, let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it." He wanted to curse the day where there was the announcement that he'd been born. Why? Because life had been so hard. Now, you could, if you were not one of Job's friends, but you realize, okay, Job did nothing wrong. His friends missed it. But I'd step in and be like, Job, your life's been great. You've had a bad week, so you lost everything. But seriously, look at the overall picture. Probably not helpful. But Job's experience is, I wish I was never born. It's so hard to be in this world. Look at Job 10, verse 18. Job 10:18. Job is asking God, and his prayers seem like they're being not even heard right now because of the darkness that he's feeling. Job 10:18, "Wherefore then hast thou brought me forth out of the womb? Oh, that I had given up the ghost, and no eye had seen me." In that case, I wish I had been either miscarried or stillborn, is what he's saying. I should have been as though I had not been. I should have been carried from the womb to the grave. So go back to Ecclesiastes 4. Life is extremely difficult. I remember when we had Alice, and I was holding her in the middle of the night there in the hospital so Heather could get her first sleep in like 2 days. And just thinking about, what is this world we've brought you into? I have no guarantee but that you will suffer. I can't guarantee that you'll go to heaven. I can't guarantee that you're going to trust in Jesus. I can't guarantee that any day in your life will be blessed. I can guarantee you will face hardship. And when you realize that that's the guarantee, you're like, boy, why have kids? And that goes along with this, right? And some people don't have kids for that reason. Is that right? Of course not. It's not scriptural. To bring a child into a world of suffering is more biblical than to not have a child. So as we come to Ecclesiastes chapter 4, we're coming to a really stark question and reality. And Solomon was very much in a depressed place as he thought about just all that kids and people, not just kids, but people face. So what did he discover? Let's look at this chapter, and there are 4 things in general that he discovers. First of all, let's look at the first 6 verses, and I'll see if someone would like to summarize what he found. So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of such as were oppressed, and they had no comforter. And on the side of their oppressors there was power, but they had no comforter. Wherefore I praised the dead which are already dead, more than the living which are yet alive. Yea, better is he than both they, which hath not yet been, like not even conceived, who hath not seen the evil work that is done under the sun. Again, I considered all travail and every right work, for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. The fool foldeth his hands together and eateth his own flesh. Better is a handful with quietness than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. If you were to summarize it, there might be multiple themes here, but how would you summarize what the preacher, remember the word Ecclesiastes comes down to the word preacher. We're being preached at by someone who's had a really tough life by his own doing. What did he find in the first 6 verses? How would you summarize it? Don't let the rain make you quiet.
Life is vanity.
Yeah. Life is vanity. Now, let's zero in. What specific aspects of life was he bringing? If you don't have it on the tip of your tongue, you don't have to answer. Do you see any specific aspects of life he's pointing out that render it vain, empty? That's what I'm trying to look for here.
Under the sun, probably the suffering. But then us as believers, above the sun, suffering is our benefit.
Right. Yeah, you're jumping to the good stuff way too fast there. No, I'm just kidding. As Christians, we can't help it, right? That's how we cope. We're constantly thinking above the sun, or we won't make it. So yeah, there's suffering. One word that I noticed he mentions there specifically is oppression, but you also see laziness and envy. But there's just this suffering, and one of the examples of suffering he gives is oppression without any comforter. It's amazing that in Western society, if something goes bad, people are sure the Lord is coming. And I think that is an evidence of just how narrow-minded Western society can be. Not that Eastern society isn't. The Lord is no more likely coming today than he was 1,000 years ago when the Black Death was spreading through Europe. The point is, when we see things that are horrible, we think it's over. But you look at other countries where there has been oppression without comforters or without a good government for 2,000 years, where it has always seemed like Armageddon was around the corner. And here in Western society, you get a bad president and you're like, he's coming this year. We're sure of it. And he might. But you ask some of these people in Africa, in the dark continent, where tribal oppression has been constant, just constant slaughter. And whether it's at the hands of the Muslims or the ancestral worshipers, any of the groups, really it's come down to tribal hatred where there'd be no comforter. Kids dead and laying in the street, and we see the pictures in the news. And it caused Solomon, as he saw this, yes, he was a part of a wonderful country, but as he assessed the world, he wasn't stuck in his Israelite mindset. He knew this is unique compared to the rest of the world. There are people being oppressed and crying, and there's no one to comfort them. There's no government agency seeking to find a home for these children. There is no one seeking to find, no Bright Side project that will provide food or free Christmas presents to these kids. There is literally no one. And this oppression drove Solomon to say, as the preacher, I praise the dead. And even more than that, those who are never born. Now, as Kenny got to, that's not the best view to have of the world, but it is extremely difficult to see, isn't it? This is the world we live in. But we would ask ourselves again, is he right? Is it better to have never been born than to live and suffer? Well, we'll talk more about that in a moment. Now, verses 7 through 12, what did the preacher recognize here that was a vanity to him? Then I returned, and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, he hath neither child nor brother, yet there is no end of all his labor. Neither is his eye satisfied with riches, neither saith he, for whom do I labor and bereave my soul of good? This also is vanity, yea, it is a sore travail. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Again, if two lie together, then they have heat, but how can one be warm alone? And if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. What vanity did the preacher cry out about in life in these verses? Anybody? Come on, someone see it? You can see the good verses. We always see the good verses here, but do you see the vanity that he saw? Okay, Lindsay's.
He points out that being alone is vanity, especially if you're alone and working every day, and then there's just no end to it.
Yeah. Loneliness with the endless work and travail. Yes, two are better than one. And that's used as marriage sermon texts. It's used in marriage counseling. It's used in courtship counseling. It's used to advising good friendships. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken, which many believe to be God in the mix. But that's not what Solomon's thinking about. He's recognizing that even if two are together, they started alone, they will most likely end alone. They can't die together. In reality, he says, there is a period of loneliness for everybody. It is a lonely world. It's a lonely life. And so he says, look, the value of having a fellow, a friend, someone to hold you up. Solomon's point is there are so many people who don't have that person to hold them up, who don't have that person to keep them warm at night. And yet they have to work and work because there is no one to share the labor. So he discovered loneliness. And just as with oppression, he viewed death as better, with loneliness, he saw the value of a friend. But of course, often, as he said in the Proverbs, a faithful man or a faithful friend, who can find? You know, it's hard to come by. And this is driving Solomon to say, it's better to never live. You think of this with little kids as they go through their friendships and relationships. And partly because you know it's going to be so hard, and partly because you know they're not going to believe you or listen to you. It's just loneliness next to oppression is one of the most difficult things in our world. Being alone without any family. We saw the Christmas Carol, the play downtown, and Ebenezer Scrooge was lonely, but his money kept him company. And it's a beautiful picture of how a man realized that there is more value in friendship than being alone. Because all his life he had just worked all his relationships away just to amass his wealth. But he didn't spend it on anything or give it to anybody. And even though Charles Dickens didn't have an ounce of gospel in his writing, the carols that they sang during it really did remind us that through Christ, we realize there is a friend that sticks closer than a brother, right? There's a friend that never fails us. Now, what did he discover in verses 13 through 16? I guess there were 3 things he discovered in this chapter. I said 4. Better is a poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. For out of prison he comes to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom becomes poor. I considered all the living which walk under the sun, with a second child that shall stand up in his stead. There is no end of all the people, even of all that have been before them. They also that come after shall not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirit. What do you see in these verses that cause Solomon to say it's vain to even want to live? Someone who's been too quiet this morning. Come on, I know you have thoughts. What does Solomon see is vanity in verses 13 to 16? Whether you see 1 or 2 things or can summarize it. Chaz, you have any thoughts to pick on you? Leonard? Not coming to you? Do you have anything? You see some? I think. Okay, we'll hear both of you. Heather's got one, and then we'll hear what Karen says.
He mentions kings and the succession of power and how it's vain. Maybe I'm reading into it because my brain is not working. But
well, and he kind of trails into
it's too early. I didn't have enough coffee. But it's not enough to attain even becoming a king, and that can be seen anywhere. It could be in a school setting or a career, anything you're trying to do. Even like becoming the best homeschool mom in the co-op. There's always something to try to attain, and it's vain. Yeah. What were you going to say, Karen? Because these are some difficult verses. For me to ask you to summarize in one thing is difficult because there are multiple.
I don't know if this is right, but I think of generations that they just keep following in the same path.
Yeah.
And they leads to nowhere.
Yeah, that's part of it. Like you could have a good generation, then a bad generation, and back and forth, and it kind of makes it look like, and the same is with authority. You could have a foolish king and just the biggest mistake that ever happened in authority, and a child raises up in his stead that does a better job than him. So we might just summarize it as, I see. I broke out verse 16 as a separate item because it's so different. Foolishness and rulers, those in authority. He looked at it and he saw, okay, there's oppression with no comforter. There's loneliness with no friend. There's foolishness even at the highest level. And we see it generation by generation. And then in verse 16, I didn't know what else to call this, but just emptiness and frustration. There is no end of all the people, even of all that have been before them. They also that come after shall not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and vexation of spirit, this generational emptiness and frustration. As he looks at all of this question that comes once again is it better to live a life of suffering, to die young, and maybe cut that suffering short, or to have never been born? Now, before I answer it from a Christian perspective, there is one ray of light that the preacher caught here. And that is in verse 9. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their labor. This is a beautiful verse, isn't it? Jesus said, "Ye in me, and I in you. In that day you will understand this truth." The greatest truth, the most precious relationship in all our lives. And as Ray said at the beginning, without suffering, we would never be brought to know that friendship. Without living, we would never get to know the value of good friendship, let alone the friendship with Jesus Christ. How many times is it that we get through a really hard season of life and we come to a really blessed season of life, especially in our relationships. And we say, boy, I am so glad God preserved me to this point. I told myself there was no hope, but today is a good day. Thankful for everyone in my life and everyone that God has brought into my life. But as Christians, there is never a day in which we are without Christ, right? And in which our relationships don't have Christ in verse 12 as the one who makes it a threefold cord. And the threefold cord is, of course, a piece of twine, right, with three threads threaded together. It's stronger, much stronger. So what can we preach to ourselves as Christians and to the world? I do want to say that when I started our youth club that week when we studied this chapter with that question, I was so impressed that Ariana raised her hand right away. She said, better to live and suffer. I said, why? She's like, because it's the only way you could know him. And that's the truth, isn't it? From a very under-the-sun perspective, it doesn't make any sense to live because we don't ever want to suffer. That's also a pessimistic perspective, you could say. There's a lot of good hallmarks out there that try and help you see the bright side of life. You know, it's worth it for the good times. But Hallmark stays under the sun, typically. Every once in a while you hear some Christian lingo in there. But Christ, having a relationship with him who is above the sun, who came under the sun to die for our sins, rose again and ascended above the sun, so to speak, is our high priest. We are in him. We are seated in the heavenlies. This changes everything, and we realize it wasn't just worth it to live and suffer so that I could know him, but it was the suffering that specifically led me to him, right? It reminds me of the story Amy Carmichael wrote called Mimosa, and it was a story of a lady in India who met Amy Carmichael when she was a child, and she learned very briefly that there's a creator. That's all she heard. Didn't hear the gospel or anything else. And for the next 20-some years, she lived on her own. She had an arranged marriage. He was neglectful, abusive, the typical man of those times in that place. They had children. She was completely on her own with the children. In all of it, though, she believed there was a creator who was looking out for her. There was someone who made her, someone she could trust in. Sometimes they would have no food. The kids would be so thin because she couldn't feed them. And in the night, I remember a story in which they literally had no food and the kids were all crying because there's no food. And you could get angry as you think. There is an oppressor, this man who didn't care for his family. He left them. And there's no one to comfort them. It would have been better if they'd never been born, right? But she prayed. She didn't even know the name of God, you know? And a neighbor, she was hated by all of her neighbors because she refused to practice the Hindu traditions. Because she believed there's a creator, not made of wood and stone, you know, or animals or a white elephant. And so she was very much ostracized for this and oppressed even by her neighborhood. And yet one of the neighbors, out of a disgust for not wanting to throw some of their rice away, gave it to her in the middle of the night. And she was able to feed her children. And it just kept reminding her there is a God who takes care of us. And so for like 20 years, I think, she lived in just a life of constant oppression and hardship and loss until she made her way back by God's providence to Amy Carmichael's fellowship in Dohnavur, where she heard the complete gospel and realized this is the one I've been trusting in for these 20 years or so. And she was greatly blessed. She was given the things she needed to really succeed through a relationship with Christ. From that perspective, how awful would it have been if they hadn't lived through those years of suffering? If those kids hadn't been brought up in that terrible situation? It is so easy to get so upset with people who are doing things wrong and are just, it's not fair, it's not right. And yet from the vantage point of Christ, it's all working together for good. And that's one of the first things we need to consider here. Well, you know what? Did you read that already? I already gave away some, but would anyone of you, and I meant to ask this, what would you preach to somebody? And by preach, you know what preach means. You're heralding good news. Today, preach means you get in their face and point your finger at them. When the Bible, by preaching, means you are heralding good news. There is good news. What would you preach to the world or to a friend who's really struggling with the suffering and oppression, the foolishness of rulers, the loneliness of life? What would you preach to that person? Without just dismissing what they're saying, what would you preach from a New Testament perspective? Or let's say this friend is you, but you're going to call it a friend. What would you preach? Karen has some.
Hang on to Jesus, and the good is coming.
Yeah, I like that. Hang on to Jesus, the good is coming. And that's a good way to picture it, too. You're like, you're just hanging on for dear life. Hang on to Jesus. Reminds me of Hebrews 4. We have an anchor. And there's, as my dad was just saying this the other day, I think it was in our family devotional at our family Christmas get-together, that there is a rope between us and that anchor, which is Christ. But you have to picture the rope. You have to picture that you are tethered. You have to remind yourself of that. And the good is coming.
Now, like, kind of near and close to my heart, and I'd kind of help encourage others. 2 Corinthians 4, we who live are always dying so that the life of Christ also may be made manifest. We have this treasure in earthen vessels. And then also, too, in James, it's very clear that there's a crown that we can cast at his feet.
Yeah, so to encourage a fellow believer, we're called to die daily, in a sense, so that the life of Christ can be manifested. And that comes back to that perspective that Karen mentioned. When you view yourself as tethered to Christ, it changes your daily dying, right? It makes it so that the life of Christ becomes more real and precious to you. If you lose that tether, I didn't say if you lose your salvation, I meant if you lose the sense that you're tethered, you won't experience that. What was that second verse? Oh, the crown. Yeah, there is a crown. Yeah, Heather.
To the world, I think it can be really hard because in my quest to understand textual variants, I found out that one of the major textual critics does not find any reason to doubt Scripture because of textual variants. But the reason he's an agnostic is because of the problem of pain in the world. And I had a friend recently say to me that that's why she started doubting in college, was because how could a good God, you've heard people say it, how could a good God allow pain? And I think, especially in the case of that friend, we don't understand the extent of our sin before a holy God. We don't understand how undeserving we are. And I think she feels like she's tried to be the best mom and the best person, and she has suffered a lot. Her children have physical needs, but that can be really hard to explain, like that pain, but to not understand we don't deserve anything.
So what would you preach to her in the light of that?
I didn't have time to, but I've been thinking about it, and that's the answer, is that we think we deserve better. We think we shouldn't be struggling. We think we shouldn't have this pain. Nobody should treat us this bad, or how could I get cancer? And we are actually, like I think Job says, I'm a worm. That's his perspective at the end, is I just put my hand on my mouth. I have nothing to say to the God who made everything.
Yeah. Yeah, and you ended with the best part there, too. It's like the God who made everything. It's, if you get to know him, that has a perk, right? It reminds me of, we would go in door-to-door calling, and one of the repeated questions I would hear that people would have as an argument against the gospel is, why did God let my little child die? Why did God let my little niece die and suffer with whatever ailment? And I had heard someone answer that, I can't remember where, but found it to be an interesting thing to pose. Why did God send his son to suffer? Why did God send Jesus to suffer so much for us? It must mean that he actually sees our suffering and cares and loves us. But yeah, that's very true. The world sees and feels the suffering. And it, like Heather was saying, we want to empathize, but not to the point that we're saying, yeah, I agree. I'm not sure how that's possible. It's like to question the Bible, in other words, without dismissing their pain, to show them that the Bible gives the answer. And it's through the God who created us. Anybody else? Well, I have some things that I thought of. If you live, you can know Christ, and any suffering pales in comparison with the glories to come. Go to Romans chapter 8. This is a verse to think about often, I believe. It's a verse to think about often. And you might say, but I'm not really like Paul. I'm not one of the great missionaries of the world. And that's not what Paul's saying. He's saying if you know Christ, everybody is suffering, right? Everybody's suffering. But if you know Christ, your sufferings quite literally have a proportionate value to the glory that's to come. It's actually, yes, it's proportionate, but the glory is far greater. These aren't just the sufferings for Christ, but they're the sufferings when we bring Christ into the picture even. In Romans 8:17, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if so be that we suffer with him, that we may be also glorified together. For I reckon, or I count on the fact that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. That's real, right? That is real stuff. This is a real glory that's going to be revealed. Do we bring this into the picture of our suffering? And for our children, to paint a picture of heaven. To paint a picture of heaven. Look, our home is not going to be heaven. Our homes are not going to be heaven. Our occupation, our job, our situation, the meals each day are not always going to be heavenly. This isn't heaven. But to tell our children that do not look for your heaven here. Look for it later. And I think of this because I have little kids and because they're beginning to ask these super deep questions about life. There is a glory that's coming that is tangible. It is real. It can be touched with your hands someday. And if you are willing to throw away the world for Christ, you will know this glory. Just like Moses, right? He was willing to exchange the pleasures of sin for a season, the treasures of Egypt, for the sufferings of Christ, because he knew to see him who is invisible, and one day to see him face to face, it's worth it all, that glory. Secondly, if you're lonely, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And we don't even need to turn there. Proverbs 18. Well, you know what? Let's go there. There is another part to this proverb that's really, really good. Proverbs 18:24. If you are lonely, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Proverbs 18:24. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly, and there is a friend that sticks closer than a brother. And the proverb is talking about a good friend, by the way. The proverb is not talking about Jesus. It's talking about a good friend. Solomon is. But obviously, the New Testament parallel is Jesus. Solomon in the proverb is saying, often we will find a friend who's closer than any family member we've ever had. There will be that close friend that you don't know how the friendship became what it is, but you're just inseparable. They're always there. You can more easily get in a fight with a family member that causes you to, maybe not talk on the phone for a while, but there's this friend that just never offends away. They're always there. And this is a truism for life. It's so true for so many people. But we as Christians have taken this proverb to especially talk about Jesus, right? Who always is by our side. He said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Therefore, I will boldly say, what does he say? What will I fear? I will not fear what man can do to me. because he will never leave me nor forsake me. And lastly, if you're tired of foolish old rulers, the perfect king is coming, right? We just celebrated this. Let's just read it again. Isaiah 9, verses 6 and 7. There are people who are so bent out of shape with politics, I wonder when the last time is they meditated on the kingdom of Jesus Christ. It's like some folks, if they spent half as much time reading the book of Revelation and Isaiah and the minor prophets and the book of Deuteronomy even, as they did listening to the political news and just this stuff, I think it would greatly change their outlook. But in Isaiah 9:6, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and it's of course Jesus. And the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful. I just love that word. It means beyond our comprehension. Counselor, the mighty God. By the way, counselor, there was no comforter. There was no one to console. The king will be the consolation, right? The mighty God. He is the God of heaven, the creator. The everlasting Father. He is one with the eternal God, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even forever. The zeal, that boiling over energy of God's plan, his heart, it will perform this. The Lord of hosts will absolutely stop at nothing to perform this plan. Jesus will sit as king. And when he sits as king, a lot of people take note of the fact that he's going to wipe out all his enemies. And they say, how could he? They miss the fact that he will absolutely care for the fatherless and the widows and the suffering in that day. There will be, the oppressed will be elevated to the highest place when Jesus rules as king. He will see them. He will take notice of them. He will deliver them. I wish I had some of the verses on that to read. But when you read in the Old Testament and Jesus said again, and God said again and again, don't forget the fatherless and the widow. He is the God of the fatherless and the widow. It just tells you what his kingdom is going to be like. And so it's amazing to me as even though we don't want to dismiss this, but it does amaze us who know God very well, that when you see the suffering of young children, perhaps, or widows in some of these countries where women are treated like chattel, that people would point the finger at God, first of all. How could God let this happen? Secondly, they point the finger at God when they read of end times prophecies that he will come and wipe out all of his enemies. That is really the answer to current suffering, ultimately. He will come, he will wipe out the oppressors, he will establish a kingdom of peace, and he will care for all of those who are not being fed, not being taken care of in the kingdom. There will be no more impoverished anymore. And today we see people, on one hand, they try and they want more money than they can print to pay for things that people need. And on the other hand, you have people who say, no mercy, it's law and order. Is there no in between? Probably not in this life. There will be no perfect ruler. But Jesus Christ is the perfect king, and he is coming. So as Christians, what do we preach to ourselves? The glory to come makes this present suffering worth it. There is a friend who sticks closer even in the loneliest days. Seek him out. And the king is coming to establish his kingdom. So what is the answer to our first question? It is better to live and to suffer, right? But there's another answer. It's not up to us, is it? It's not up to us. We don't get to choose when we live or die. The fact that I was born into such a home with such a family and such situation, who's in control of all this? God. And hasn't he promised that he will work all things together for good to those who love him? Well, that's going to lead into our morning worship message, so I won't go there. But let's just close in prayer. Father, thank you for the words of Solomon depressing words, words that miss the picture that's above the sun, but a reality that many people are struggling with, many believers are struggling with, many unbelievers around us are struggling, grappling with this, and they are willing to talk about it often. May we be ready to give them an answer. May we be willing to listen. May we be willing to love. May we be willing to give practical encouragement, but may we ultimately have the boldness and winsomeness to give them Christ. In fact, Lord, we know that you use human suffering to pave the way for so many gospel conversations. And yet we confess, Lord, that we are often unable to know exactly how to help people, but you do. Would you please use us? Even in this coming year, Lord, perhaps in trials in our own lives, in the lives of people we love, in the lives of people we will be in contact with, to preach the truth of the gospel. And I thank you, Lord Jesus, that you are coming soon to establish your kingdom, to right all wrongs. May we be demonstrating the grace of that kingdom now as the church. May we love the unloved and care for those who are not cared for through the gospel and practical helps, but ultimately we look forward for you to come. Even so come, Lord Jesus. Amen.